So we are coming to the end of our growing season here on our small holding in North Wales, and I can't help but be planning next year's garden already. More specifically, tomatoes. I've had the best tomato growing year of my life this year. It's not because the weather was glorious or anything, it's because this was my first year growing undercover in a polytunnel. I may have grown enough tomatoes for the year, it's hard to say at this point, but I've put up a significant amount of sauces and chopped tomato, salsa, pizza sauce, things like that. So I'll see how far that gets me. But it's really got me thinking about the paste tomatoes that I'm going to grow next year. I can flex the number that I'm going to grow based on how far through the winter and the spring and the early summer this year's get us, but I want to know the varieties that I'm going to be growing. By paste tomatoes, I'm talking about those really thick, meaty varieties without a lot of seeds, without a lot of moisture, the ones that cook down really, really easily and really well into a nice sauce. So today I thought I would share my own personal experience of 3 different paste tomatoes that I grew this year, how easy they were to grow, what the yield was like, how easy they were to cook, all those things, and I'll let you know which ones I'm going to grow next year and which ones I'm definitely not going to grow next year. Of the 3 paste varieties that I grew, 2 are still just about clinging on here in my polytunnel at the end of October. The one that isn't is the one I'm going to talk about first, and that's the Roma. So they are this quintessential plum shape. While they have succumbed first to disease here, I wouldn't necessarily say that that makes them a bad variety in terms of yield. I think they probably had the best yield out of the Roma tomatoes per plant. This one is quite small, I would say, as far as the size of the fruits go. And in terms of cooking, they're really easy to peel. There's not loads of seeds, and they make a really, really tasty sauce. It doesn't take ages to cook down. But all of that being said, I am not going to grow Romas again next year. And let me tell you why. The Roma is a determinate variety or a bush variety. I want to put this down. And where I live here, it is very, very, very high humidity, but very mild. So it really doesn't ever dry out. And the Romas, for me, are just a little bit too prone to disease. I don't think they are necessarily inherently more prone to disease. I think it's harder to keep airflow around them in these conditions. It's harder to prune them. Some people who live in different climates might say, you don't have to prune a Roma, just stick a cage around them and that'll do. Here, it's just not true. I grew them outside last year. They got disease so quick. Barely got anything from them. This year I've grown them in the tunnel and they've done pretty well. They have clung on, but they were the first tomato plants in my whole garden to show disease. And that makes me think that this variety, as they're getting the disease earlier, just because the airflow on them isn't great, it's very hard for me to prune and stake them in a way that kind of makes sense, that doesn't kill off too much of the yield. And once they get disease, well, then that's in here in my tunnel, and it's inevitable that everything else is going to get affected. So next year I want to see how long my tomato plants can go without disease if I don't have a determinate variety in here that I know is going to get diseased first. Okay, next up, let's move on to the San Marzano. This one's a little bit knackered, bless him, but they're still going, and they make this, at least in my experience, this sort of longer, more bullet-shaped tomato. In terms of cooking, they are my absolute favourite variety that I've grown. They are really dry. They're not very nice to eat fresh, but so I wouldn't choose them as a dual purpose tomato, but just for cooking with, just for making sauces, just for canning up, they are the driest, the meatiest, with the fewest seeds. They also don't have a very thick core. Really, really easy to cook them down into a really, really nice sauce. So they are just about clinging on in here. They are a bit diseased, but it's the end of October. What are you going to do? This variety is a cordon or indeterminate variety, which means you keep it pruned to one main growing stem, and all the leaf branches and the fruit trusses come off of that one. Which here I find much easier. While you have to do the pruning, which on a determinate you might not have to do, I find it much easier to keep the airflow in a place that's just super, super humid and wet all the time. Now, that being said, I did find that they grew a little bit erratically. Some indeterminates, you grow up, you prune the suckers, and then otherwise they stay quite uniform. These were growing all over the place. I'd prune the suckers and then you'd have a random extra one growing off the end of a fruit truss or off the end of a leaf branch. Like, it wasn't predictable. So I would think that I was up to date with my pruning, and then you'd come in and there'd just be this huge sucker around the other side that you hadn't noticed because they're growing out of somewhere just completely random. But That aside, I will definitely be growing them again because I think they are the absolute best in terms of cooking with. The flavour, the dryness, it is exactly what I want. They have succumbed to disease now. I'm taking off the reason why this one is still slightly green is that I'm taking them off now. I'm bringing them inside to ripen inside just because there is disease in here and they are succumbing to that. But I want to see next year how they do in here if I've not got the Romas in here bringing that disease in. It might be that they do exactly the same, in which case fair enough, but that's my experiment for next year, is to try the San Marzanos without having the Romas in here. Well, it was a very appropriate time for my lens to fog up and prove the point I was making about humidity. But I'm back now. The final variety of sourcing tomato that I grew in my tunnel this year was the Neina, which is also known as the Crimson Plum. I grew some of these outside as well, but I'll circle back to that. These are advertised as being blight resistant, and so I would be foolish not to give them a go given the conditions that I'm growing in, and I'm actually really pleasantly surprised. I have loved this variety and I will definitely be growing them again. That being said, they are my least favourite in terms of cooking with. They're a bit wetter, they've got a lot more seeds, and they've got a much thicker core. With the San Marzanos and the Romas, I don't even really core them. That all just goes in there and it breaks down to nothing, whereas this has got a bit of a woody core that does need chopping out. I also don't remove the seeds on my Romas and San Marzanos when I'm cooking them down into sauce. There's so few that I don't mind a few seeds in there, whereas these have a bit more that I start to think maybe I want to pop those out rather than have all of the seeds in my sauce or whatever. These are the only plants in here that still look strong. I think they are succumbing more to the cold now than they are to disease, which is great. So while they're not the absolute best to cook with, they're still way better than, you know, my normal salad tomatoes or cherry tomatoes in terms of cooking potential. They're not my favourite actual sourcing variety. I think I will always grow them in my garden as a failsafe. If we do have a particularly bad year for disease, I feel like I've got a lot more chance of getting any yield at all if I've got a good few of these growing in here and maybe buying that extra bit of time. Yep, fogged up again. As I said, I grew some of these outside as well. I just wanted to do a side-by-side comparison to see how that disease resistant variety is going to do outside in North Wales, and actually okay, the plants are still standing even outside. The yield is unsurprisingly lower from my outside plants than the ones in the tunnel. The whole plant is a lot smaller and the fruits it's putting out are smaller, but it's great to know that there is a variety that is worth bothering trying to grow outside here. Obviously the majority of my tomato growing is going to happen in the tunnel, but if I only had outside growing space, I would 100% recommend growing the Neina for a sourcing variety outside in the UK, even if you're somewhere wet and most of the time pretty overcast. If I had absolutely ideal conditions, I think I would happily say that my favourite paste tomato is the San Marzano for flavour, for ease of growing and for ease of cooking. But given less than ideal conditions and for reliability, I think the Neina is just an amazing option to have. So if I was only growing outside, 100% I'd recommend the Neina if you're somewhere that humidity is a problem. If I was only growing in containers, then I think I would go ahead and bring the Romas back in and grow, you know, just a nice big bushy Roma in a pot. But for now, since I grow in the ground, I'm going to nix the Romas for next year. Goose is woken up. And I'm going to crack on with the San Marzanos and the Neina. Now that being said, I think I would like to add a third variety, so if you have any recommendations of a paste tomato variety that I can grow in my tunnel, I would love to hear it. So let me know what you're growing, bearing in mind it's not very sunny, it's very wet, and I'm in the UK. I would love to hear your suggestions for paste tomato varieties for 2025. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you again next time. Cheers.